Right, we're back. Thank you, Cheryl, for remembering to record this. I tend to forget these things. That's why it's great to have a co-host. Appreciate it. All right. Well, just to do just a recap for where we were, and to show you a book that you really, this is the first book that I read for 10 years back in the 70s. Suzuki Roshi's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it is that that certain flavor of Zen. There's really two great flavors of at least Japanese Zen. What we worked with at first in the first sitting period, which was to just let everything be, to just sit. And then the preliminary breaking the ice kind of practice, which is what in Buddhism in general they call preliminaries. At the monks out at Gethsemane, they talk about antiphons. These are things that sort of break mentalize certain songs or whatever. So most traditions use something to sort of break the surface tension of the mind, to start to let us dropping into the cave of the heart, an image that I like a lot. If you wanted to find out more about that Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, you couldn't get a better source. But there's another flavor of Zen that I want to sort of open up for your toolbox. Hopefully tomorrow, one of the topics is going to be interspirituality, how in this third millennium here, interspirituality is really where I think it's at. And it's learning from all the traditions that are worth learning from, and then forging your own kind of mature adult spiritual practice. We can learn from so many, just even the flute music there from Carlos Nakai, it sort of put you in touch with the indigenous wisdom that was, in this land before the pilgrims landed. Yeah. So there's just a lot of great traditions and tools that we can learn, and we're gonna work with a kind of different form of Zen, the Rinzai Zen, which is the other flavor. There's a Soto and the Rinzai, and we're going to see what kind of tool that the Rinzai Zen could be. Zen again always just means meditation, so just two different kinds of Japanese meditation that came from the Buddha, came from northern India and then went into China. Certain Chinese Zen has a certain flavor. Every tradition has a certain flavor or a certain sound. And if it resonates with you, well, then you can put it in your toolbox. And resonation is what the heart does. And to resonance or to resonate really means to resound. And so there's something about, when you meet somebody, or you meet a tradition, or you meet a teaching, and it sort of resonates with you, something like rings in there, you're resounding something that Plato felt, well, you already knew in deep time. And then, so those are the things so if it doesn't resonate with you, well, that's okay. Just, you don't use it. You use the stuff that resonates with you. So I want to read a bit from Merton before we go to Rilke. Rilke is going to be the text we're going to break up to sort of deal with the situation. It is a kind of 9/11 situation in everybody's life when something falls apart, something disappears. Just maybe not as dramatic as those two twin towers falling. It's hard to beat that for drama, but in our own life, it just is equal. The relationship ends, job ends, belief in something ends, things arise, display for a while, and then they dissolve or disappear. That's the nature of phenomenology, the nature of phenomenon, Here's Merton, it's from Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, one of his best books, that they didn't see fit to print while he was alive, but 2 months after he died in December of 68, they printed it a couple months later. But this is in his preface, just a little short part that'll sort of set the stage for the teaching today. In his preface to the book, he says, these pages are not a lecture and or self-discovery, nor are they pure soliloquy. They are an implicit dialogue with other minds, a dialogue in which questions are raised. But do not expect to find my answers. I do not have clear answers to current questions. I do have questions. And as a matter of fact, I think a man is better known by his questions than by his answers. He said, I do not have clear answers to current questions. I do have questions. And as a matter of fact, I think a man is known better by his questions than by his answers. Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. So what to do with these questions? What to do with these existential questions? You know, there's large fries or small kind of questions, which the mind is absolutely geared to deal with. And so you deal with it with the appropriate tool there, you know, how to balance your books and you know, just, you know, deal with the practicalities of life. The left brain is, you know, up to the task. But when things happen, when things fall apart, as Pema says in her great book, when existential 9/11s happen, and then you're just left there with questions, to realize that, yeah, it's a shock, but also to realize this is a great opening. As Martin says, a man is, you know, or a human being, you know, man or woman, is better known by their questions than their answers. When supposedly when Gertrude Stein was dying in a bed in Paris, Alice B. Toklas asked her, Gertrude, what is the answer? And Gertrude supposedly said, what's the question? So to value questions and actually to honor these questions that come to us in the course of a life. And, you know, I sort of figured naively by the time you get to hit your 70s, you'd have a bunch of answers, you know, that you could deal with. Well, I find the questions are accruing, and the questions even more precious now, you see. So how to deal with the questions. And so we're really bringing together a couple of different traditions here in our exploration of how to work with these kind of existential questions. Bring the poetic tradition, because we're gonna see what Rilke has to say about questions, and then actually make a connection with or the Rinzai Zen guys and how they deal with these kinds of questions, and then we can take that actually practice it in our meditation session that follows. So here's Rilke first of all, and he's talking again not about large fries or small, but he's talking about these kind of existential questions for which there is no answer to be found in the mind. Lord knows we try. It's the first go-to because we're trained to live in the mind, in the left brain, and so we always try to work things out up there. Imagine if we had, if we had actually been able to sit with the question of 9/11 before we reacted. We didn't respond, we reacted as the mind would react. But for a couple of days, we had this opening where the mind stopped, and then we were in the heart, and the heart responded with kindness, with compassion, with self-sacrifice. But then the mind came back, and then we just, gonna bomb somebody. Unfortunately, 20 years of that. We're sort of seeing. It's really the thing to see now. of what that 20 years ago amounted to, you see. Well, here's Rilke on this. And this was actually in a letter he wrote to a young poet. And this poem was just sort of abstracted from that letter. He said, "Be patient towards everything that is unresolved in your heart, and learn to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for answers which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Then perhaps one day, without even noticing it, you will have lived your way into the answer." Let's break this open. I mean, I believe that that's the sort of what we do in the talks, is not to give facts or anything, but just sort of to break open the text. This is a sacred text for me. It should be for anybody who's lived long enough to deal with these questions. Now, how do we normally deal with the questions? We're impatient to solve them. This is not Agatha Christie territory, not a murder mystery. This is existential work, you see. So be patient. That's the first thing. Be patient. We're not a patient culture. We're quickaholics. And be patient towards everything that's unresolved in your heart. Notice he goes right to the heart. These are heart issues, and they're not resolved. And the mind can never resolve these issues. It'd be like, I mean, we had to cut down a maple tree to make room for the solar panels we put on the property here. And if I'd gone out with a tablespoon and tried to cut it down, there'd be no panels there. I mean, not the appropriate tool. Just like the left brain, mind is not the appropriate tool for questions that are unresolved in your heart. See, and the heart is the tool. So be patient towards everything unresolved in your heart, and learn how to love the questions themselves. Well, if you could just do that, you'd be well ahead of the majority of human beings on the planet. To learn to love these kinds of questions. Your spouse dies. That's a 9/11 moment. If it's suddenly or even over long term, two of my really great friends had that happen to them in the last couple of years, and they were very different. One went fast, one went slow. It doesn't make any difference. It's a 9/11 moment, you see. To learn to love the questions themselves. And then Rilke is so precise about this, as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. When it was another language entirely when these kinds of things happen. How do you read a book in a foreign language? It's a locked room or a book written in a very foreign language. Have patience towards everything. It's unresolved in your heart. Now, these kinds of questions that can't be processed, that can't be figured out. Like I have a good friend who lost their spouse, and she was saying the other day, well, maybe I haven't really even grieved this yet. Yeah, well, you can't process it. You can't figure it out. You can't explain it. You have to, in a way, metabolize it. The body is always a great a great teacher here. The body, if you eat something, it metabolizes it. It has to break it down, get the nutrients, and then it gets rid of the waste. If it's working, that's metabolism. Metabolism is a much better word even than processing. That's a little bit of a, corporate word, How many of you like processed cheese? I don't, So, they'll try to process what happens to you. It's really like, it's like the corporations are in your head there, that's where you can process things. No, to metabolize something is in the body, And it's a deeper thing. You cannot process 9/11 kinds of moments. You can react to them as we did. Now, the next line is kind of like heresy in the Google age. Don't search for answers. I love these search things. I only have the one line of a poem. I want the whole poem. You type it in, 0.3 seconds. You got the whole poem there. Well, that's great. That's great. You can't do it for these kinds of things. Don't search for answers to these kind of questions, which could not be given to you now. And this is interesting because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. So what is he talking about there? Well, he's talking about the amount of time it takes to metabolize a loss, breakage. Human beings lose things. That's the one thing we all share, everyone here. I don't care how many people are on the program. It would probably be a true statement that every one of us has lost things and will continue to lose things, including to lose this incarnation. Each one of us, lost. And loss cannot be processed. It has to be lived with. It has to be metabolized, and that's a slower process. Meditation is the ultimate slow lane. In case you haven't noticed that in your practice, that it's just slow, which is totally at odds with our culture because we want something to be faster. Don't search for answers which could not be given to you now. You cannot Google the answer to these things because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. After the last loss of our marriage, it's the second time, it was really 6 years of grief for me. 6 years of, I wrote a poem about 6 years of walking the road every day. Walking the road is, taking a long walk is a good way to metabolize grief. And that was a slow process, but when it was done, it's done. And, then you're at peace. You actually know, I think, that you've grieved something fully when you have a sense of peace about it. And then when it comes back, that is a big kind of freak out that people have. I'll get a text, or I'll talk to one of my fellow pilgrims, people I've been walking with a long time on the spiritual path, and I say, God damn it, I'm dreaming about my ex-husband. I thought I was all through with that. And they said, well, that's what you thought, tell God your plans. The mind just says you're through with it, but the psyche says there's still something here. There's still something here. Okay, so you learn to love that, which is not easy. You say, oh, more work to be done, something not metabolized yet. I have a friend of mine who has a terrific knot in the center of her back. It's killing her. She's putting ice on it, she's putting heat on it. It's right in the center of her back, hard to get to kind of place, but you can lay on a heating pad or you can lay on an ice pack or something. But, and she hasn't been to a massage therapist since COVID started. But I think that's what happens to unmetabolized questions, especially unmetabolized grief. We can forget about it. We can convince ourselves that we have closure, for instance. You read the DSM, the manual for psychology, it tells you there's a certain amount of time where beyond that it's morbid grief. I think that's anybody who understands grief as, which is a huge question, um, knows that sort of nonsense. We don't have a time frame for this. Like I said, it took 6 years, and that was just what it took to metabolize it, to be at peace with it, and to actually be able to go forward in a way, you know. And that's what he's saying. He says, you know, don't search for answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And I could say that's absolutely true in this one instance. I wasn't ready really to be a good husband until after I had metabolized all that loss. And the point is to live everything. And then finally, Rilke says, we'll live the questions now. And perhaps one day, even without noticing it. And that's sort of how it is. One day, without even noticing it, you have lived your way into the answer. So his recommendation is have patience, don't search for answers, and live with these questions. And you will, without even noticing it, one day live your way into the answer. And that day is indeterminate. It's like everything else in the universe. Heisenberg, the uncertainty principle. How long will this take? People will tell me that. They'll ask me that. How long will this take? Well, I don't know. Nobody knows. But you will have a sense of when a question is answered at a level that it only can be answered, there will be a kind of a feeling of release, and that knot won't be there. And we all have knots. We have it in the unconscious, things that have been passed over, put out of consciousness. The whole work from a Jungian point of view, and I like the Jungian therapist the best. I like that approach to the spiritual path. The whole work is to bring everything, all the unconscious material up into consciousness. Remember, the heart is the deepest part of consciousness. And so bringing all those materials, all those knots, those hard things that have never been digested, metabolized, and once they're in consciousness, then you live with them. And you just let the heart work it. I'm using the image of the cave of the heart, which is an image that comes out of Hindu religion, really, but it's deeper than that. That's why I was showing those cave paintings. The particular ones today, I think, were from France, where there is this thing. I wanted to go deep on the deepest level of consciousness, and then in this case, what Rilke's saying is just leave them there. When these guys put things on the cave wall, they were taking something from the inside and putting it out there. And every time they came down, they would see that, you see. So whatever question you're working with now, we'll have a chance to work with one of these questions in our next meditation. You just put it on the wall, the cave of the heart. You don't have to do anything with it. You just say, all right, here it is. That's huge. And then every time you go down, is there. So you're not forgetting it. You're not trying to put it into, unconsciousness, which, all humans do. We had to survive as kids in some cases. We couldn't deal with everything that was coming at us. And then now sometimes in adult life, a lot comes at us at one time. It's like a tsunami. You can put it aside, but you don't want to put it out of consciousness. And you deal with, you can deal with one thing at a time, but life does not give you one thing at a time. Have you noticed that? Somehow it comes in waves sometimes. And so, you want to be able to decide, well, what one you want to work with right now. And those other ones, keep them on the back burner, but don't try to get rid of them. Because there's energy in all of them. See, there's energy in all of them. This is the journey, really. My friend Tom from Texas sent me a thing about somebody was being really tough on modern culture and kind of spiritual supermarket, and whatever. And I think maybe a little too tough, but he had a point. He said, they weren't really going that deep. Uh, and this is the deep work that we're talking about. And life gives it to you. You don't need a Zen master. Life will give you koans, will give you mysteries, will give you things that are not solvable by the mind. And that's what the Rinzai Zen guys do. They're different than the Soto guys. There's like two different flavors. It's very different kind of approach. And I worked with a Korean Zen master for 12 years off and on. Local guy who would come to the Abbey, and we'd do Christian Zen retreats. And their approach was they use koans. You might have heard of the sound of, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That's oftentimes the first koan that they will give you in the work. Or what did your original face look like before your mother and father were born? One time when I was particularly troubled after I'd taken my parents in, which seemed like a great thing to do, what a good thing to do it would be, and it turned into like just freak out territory. Any of you who are doing work with elder parents or even spouses who are ill, my parents both had dementia, realize you get into it and then you think like, why did I do this? Well, anyway, I was really freaked out. And then I came to the retreat at the monastery with Daegak, a Korean Zen teacher. And he said, well, what happened to you? Because I was working on another koan and he just jumped the shark more or less. He said, what's going on with you? And I told him, and he just said, all right, well, whatever you're working on, forget it. You do this one. And so I said, oh, well, great, because I wouldn't have much luck with the other one. It didn't really match up with what I was going through. And he said, all right, here's what you work with. And koan just means, it really means something you can't solve by your mind. It means something else in Chinese, but it really means something that the mind can't deal with. And, and they had 540 of these things, almost a koan for any situation. Well, he said, all right, when you die and your body turns to dust and blows to the 10 directions, where's your true self then? Well, then you have to bow and walk out and sit with that for a couple of days. And, I was always angry at the guy because I was not actually patient, and nor did I learn to love these koans when I was working with them. I've learned to respect them and understand them now. But when I was working with it, I said, shit, I said, give me a break here. But he'd actually intuited what I was working with, because, yeah, my parents were, my dad especially, was crazy, but it was more like I was really getting close to mortality here. That moved them in. They were dying in front of my eyes. And so he said, well, when you die, it wasn't really about my parents. When you die and your body turns to dust and blows to the 10 directions, where's your true self then? That was a good one to sit with for me. After I got, I'm always angry, but but then sitting with that, it was worth sitting with. What is the sound of one hand clapping was the first one he gave me. It was not utter nonsense to me. And everything I tried, I'd come in for the interview and he said, well, what a koan are you working on? What is the sound of one hand clapping? He said, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And I said, well, I think, and then he'd ring the bell. He said, that's your problem. Too much thinking, and then I'd leave mad. I worked on that one for a while. I worked on that one for over a year and got nowhere, forgot about it for months at a time. But then the retreat came around. We would meet every weekend before the Derby out at the monastery. That was our thing. It was usually the last weekend in April, sometimes the first weekend in May if the Derby date was late. But yeah. And it was, I came back and I started working on it again because I knew I was going to face this guy. He was going to ask me, but I just got to the point where I was so pissed off at the whole process that I just said, fuck it. And I didn't do anything on it. I just sat. And then the guy would come around, put the little card under your mat that says you're supposed to go in line to see the Zen masters. So, I mean, I was through with it. I've told this story just over you and that. So I went in and I didn't do any preparation. I didn't give a shit. And so I went in there And he said, what Koan are you working with? I said, the sound of one hand clapping. He said, well, what is the sound of one hand clapping? I said, it's the sound of what's been passing for my life up till now. Oh, and he had this, he gave me this kind of deal. And he just, was like, well, that was an acceptable answer. Well, where did that answer come from? Well, it didn't come from up here. It came from sitting with us for a year. The sound of one hand clap was the sound of what had been passing for my life up till now. Interesting. And that was the first breakthrough I had, because but I didn't, then he said, all right. He says, very good. He says, and then he gave me the next one. And I said, well, I was sort of, when he bowed, I said, wow, that's great. But then he gave me the next one, which I had no idea of. And then he said, I remember I said, well, how many of these are there? And he said, 439 more. And I said, whoever finishes this, he says, no one. And then, he hit the bell. You had to walk out pissed off again. Then I had this other one. But then I had two koans, because I had this one that I didn't understand. What did your original face look like before your mother and father begat you? And then I had this other one, like, why was that the answer? So my mind was, so I just sat with that one. I just blew off the second one and just said, it's the sound of what had been passing for my life up till now. Think about one hand clapping. And then there's this. As I sat with it, it started to dawn on me what was going on. I was in my 40s, and in a way, hadn't really been meeting the moments. This is the sound of meeting whatever's in front of you. That actually, this is what soul is about. That's why when somebody gets on stage and sings an aria or something, or gives a great performance, we do this. We're resonating with the performance. See, but so I realized it was that the koan was pretty good, because I wasn't meeting life. I was trying to control life. I was trying to manage life. I was trying to, even when I screwed up, trying to pretend that I had it all together. All of that was really this. There was no sound there. There was no meeting. And that's at least how it worked for me. There's no one answer to that, but that's how it appeared to me, that it was a sense of what it really meant. And in the poetic tradition talks about this too, this sense of there has to be a meeting. If you're talking about soul, there has to be a meeting. There's some sound made, you see. That's why the heart resonates, resounds, you see. It's very different than thinking. Thinking is helpful in a lot of situations, but not in terms of these kind of existential situations, and especially those questions. They need to be resonated with, and that takes time. They need to be met. And the place where you can meet them is in the cave of the heart, in your deepest consciousness, in meditation. So the way that what the Rinzai guides do is, they say, when you have this thing that's unresolved in your heart, and they give you formal koans, but you don't need a Korean Zen master. Life has given you these all the time. So what I would suggest in the second sitting is, we'll start it the same way, where, really what we're doing is, when we do those 10 breaths, and the Rinzai guys would use that too. That's sort of standard Zen thing. You do these breaths to bring yourself through the surface tension of the mind to a deeper level of consciousness. It's just like this glass of muddy water, because most of the time when things happen and the towers of your life go down, there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of cloudiness, we can't even see straight. 9/11 was really a symbolic moment. It wasn't just a one-time event, you see. The whole world resonated with it, you see, because There's so much dust you couldn't even see where you were, you know. And so the first thing is always to let things calm down, to just sit. The breath really helps. The breath is like the bridge between the mind and the body, and then finally the deepest consciousness, which the traditions call the heart. So you use those 10 breaths to come down, but then you're also got a little weight belt on you. This is weight belt kind of things, like when you're scuba diving. If you don't put like a 30 or 40-pound weight belt on, you just float on top of the surface because you got these tanks filled with air, you see. So they always put this weight on. And so in the Rinzai thing, they use the koan as the weight. And so then you go down, and you can recite the koan a couple of times, and then when you feel like you're down deep, then you just even let the koan go. You can visualize yourself putting it on the cave wall if you want. And koans, you don't have to get all fancy about it. One of the best koans in the world is, "What is this?" And you could put whatever you want in with the this, but sometimes you don't even know how to name this uh, unresolved feeling. Or I had somebody I talked to the other day, and he had a dream, and he was trying to figure out the dream, but the essence of the dream was um, jealousy. That was the emotion he felt. And so I said, well, yeah, don't worry about all that figuring out stuff. That kind of analysis is all happening up here. Uh, the thing in the dream was he woke up at 2 a.m. feeling just jealous about somebody he had actually broken up with, saw her with another guy, and oh boy, was he jealous. And so I said, just go with the jealousy. Again, he said, I thought I dealt with I thought I had detached from her. Well, looks like there's something else to work on here with you. And so I said, just what is this jealousy? I said, you can just go down with that question. What is this jealousy? Not trying to figure it out, not playing psychological games with yourself, but just going down with it and living with that. So you're living with that. You put it on the cave wall, just like the ancients did. And then you dwell there. You know, that's a very simple way of looking at what we do in meditation. Even if you don't have something on your mind at any particular time, maybe you're feeling great when you do your sitting. It doesn't matter. You go down and you dwell in the deepest part of consciousness. I call it dwelling in the cave of the heart. I wearing one of my favorite T-shirts today. It's a kind of Shepherd Fairy kind of thing of the Big Lebowski, and the dude. If you've seen the Big Lebowski, which is a whole other kind of sacred text, but the dude abides. The dude abides is one of his things, because his whole life is falling apart. But the dude abides. Okay, so think of the word abiding. Think of the word dwelling. They're similar in the sense that both of them mean home. Your dwelling is your home. Abide, same root of the word abode. So you sort of go home, even if nothing's bothering you, even if it's just it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you do your second sitting there, and you nothing happening. So you're going home for 20 minutes or whatever you do. And you're just going to dwell there. You're going to abide there. And then sometimes you're in a total mess and you have a big unresolvable. Well, that's fine. You just put it on the wall there, you see, and you just abide with it, which is different than thinking about it. It's totally different than trying to figure it out or process it. Trust me, it's a whole new world when you realize you're not on the hook for that. You're not supposed to do it. You're supposed to live the question, live it. And the best place I know to live with these things, and actually to put them on the cave wall and just you're in a way bound to it. You say, yeah, you exist, and I'm going to live with you, and I'm going to keep coming down here, and I'm not going to shut you down, and I'm going to. And I know at some point it takes it takes not belief but faith, which is more like trusting in this process that this is how you can work with anything. Uh, and we're meeting a lot of everything now, but people have always had this thing. They haven't always known what to do with it, and I think our culture is sort of retarded in this area because we think you should be able to solve all these things, and it's not like a finger snap. You got to really have patience with everything unresolved in your heart. And learn to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. It really is so true, so helpful to. That's where the poetic tradition comes in with these other traditions. So we're doing hybrid stuff here always when you're working with poetic tradition, meditative tradition. Now we're working with this idea that you can actually go down with a question and you can actually recognize the question, in a way validate the question as not a mistake. Oh, even when you've done awful things or made horrible blunders, okay, you got to own it. If you don't own it, it goes in the hurt locker down there in the subconscious, and it gets tighter. I think of my friend with a knot in her back. It's not just a physical thing. The body knows the score. As a famous guy wrote a book on that. That if we work from the body, and if we take things into the body and leave them in the cave of the heart. I have a good friend who loves the image of the hammock of the heart. Well, I say whatever resonates, go with the image that you resonate with. But you can have a hammock in a cave too. I like ours under the tree here, but you go with the images that work with you. So if the cave of the heart doesn't work for you, well, you're still just taking it into the heart some way. Then what image do you have of the heart? You use the images that resonate with you. I just throw out a lot of them. One guy told me, he said, your talks are like looking at a Jackson Pollock painting. It's like everything's hitting the wall here, and I said, well, all right. Maybe something will stick. One image will work for you, see? So we're going to take a break now. And in the break, again, I'm trying to, when you're in retreat mode, try not to get any more incoming. In other words, like hooking on to looking up koans on Google or anything. Don't do anything like that. Just take the time. We'll have 15 minutes before we gather again. And you might want to write a little bit. You might want to just go outside for 5 minutes and just look at the sky. Just relax, but don't add anything to it by going on social media, unless you might have an emergency or something. And so we'll be back in 15 minutes. And we'll have 45 minutes of silence with all this material. Okay. All right. See you in a bit.